So.
Okay, hello. My name is Shannon Mattern. I am a professor at the New School in New York. I teach in the Department of Anthropology, but I'm not really an anthropologist. I'm more of a media and information studies scholar and design kind of theorist and historian.
Sorry, and I apologies.
Okay.
So it's really good to talk to you, and I hope that everybody heard that over my coughing. And I suppose what I sorry, I'm hopeless.
Okay.
But what I really wanted to use our time to talk about today is some of the work that you have done looking at maintenance and care, because it feels like there has never been a better or more important time to be thinking about how to look after things. And I really, I was particularly really excited to talk to you because I think in the writing of yours I've read, there's a real, I really love how you bring a carefulness to talking about the care, and there's a real diligence there. And in particular, I wanted to think today about the essay you wrote in 2018 called Maintenance and Care. And there's a line in there that I was reading it earlier and it jumped out at me as a kind of, oh my God, which is, now the breakdown is our epistemic and experiential reality. And that was 2 years ago. And now we're in October 2020. And how is it now, I guess?
I think it's just more of the same. It's an exacerbation of the same. In the US in particular, I'm sure this is the case in the UK and other parts of the world. We keep feeling like we've hit a new bottom, and then there's a new bottom the next week, and a new one the week after that. So it's just, I guess, reinforce the truthfulness, the reality of the brokenness of our world. And I think exacerbated is the wrong word, amplified a hope for a turning point at some point. For us in the US, we're really hopeful for our elections that are coming up in about a month. I'm sure each country has their own kind of moment of hope. But I just think that statement, I don't think I was particularly prescient. I'm not the first to have said that either, but I just think it's all the more true the further along we go in time.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I've become really aware of in some of the work I've done this year is that actually currently everyone is really exhausted, and that it's very difficult to be, I don't know, whether it's navigating a potentially endless situation or just adapting at scale. And one of the things that I think happens a lot here in the UK is that there's quite often a lot of energy is spent on new things. It's kind of when the moment comes when everybody needs to get excited and roused about something, it's newness, and there's always money to do interesting technical things, but there's often not money to look after what we have. And I suppose I kind of have two questions around that. And the first is, I guess, do you think it would help to have more exciting stories to tell about looking after things in order to create that energy? Or is there, I don't know, is there something else we can do to make it more important?
Well, I think some people have attempted to narrativize, to aestheticize. And when I say aestheticize, I don't mean make seem cosmetic or trivial. I mean to provide, to represent kind of the embodied, experiential, sensory dimensions of maintenance. So there have been, haven't done a quantitative study. I can't really compare kind of pre 2018 and post, but there do seem to be a lot of artists, an increasing number of designers as well, even some technologists who are thinking more about maintaining what already exists rather than building something new. So there is a groundswell of interest in these topics and an attempt to work through them, not only through scholarship, even in some funding situations, through kind of forms of public support, and then kind of the art and design worlds also. So that's exciting that that's happening, but I don't know that we necessarily have to ask for excitement or newness or novelty. Maybe the point is to stop looking for stimulation, to stop looking for excitement and novelty and energy, and instead realize that it's not that maintenance doesn't require energy. It does require energy, just not the kind of energy that's flashy and spectacular that kind of tends to attract attention to itself. Maybe it's kind of training ourselves away from wanting to always be stimulated, looking for the new, and instead appreciating kind of the quiet, sustaining forms of energy that take place to hold things together. So maybe it's not about kind of excitement, but about recognizing the value of the non-exciting, the non-novel.
Like, I wonder, do you think do you think there's almost an argument for comfort, for settling in, or do you think we need to dial it back even more than that?
Well, I think the concept of comfort could resonate for some folks, but that's also a term of privilege. Mm-hmm. Just providing basic sustenance for some folks is, I mean, it's not as if it's maintaining a system of comfort or a condition of comfort, because some populations have never been comfortable. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of what has happened since 2018 is really what makes that initial statement, breakdown being our epistemic and experiential reality. We've had wildfires, climate disasters, a pandemic, global uprisings over kind of racial inequity. So these uprisings and disasters over the past 2 years have, I think, really made it clear that comfort is not the epistemic and experiential reality for most folks. So maintaining that is a privilege that not everyone has access to. So comfort might resonate in some cases. I think providing kind of basic sustenance and dignity and equity or other terms that I think are more reasonable and pressing goals for other populations.
I mean, I do lots of policy work, and one of the things I do really notice is how can I put this? I think I've really learned in the last 5 years that nearly all language is political. That there's no that there's no even kind of fixed meaning to words like equity when you're doing it in a policy space. Mm-hmm. And that's really I think there's even potentially something in there, and this is something we've been talking a little bit with our fellows about on the programme, about can you demonstrate what good looks like, because once you allow other people to start imagining they're good, you've sometimes already lost it, and that actually, what are you able to plant to help that grow? That's really important. And so I think though, what I was really struck by in your essay is one of the ways that you were able to look at maintenance from lots of different angles, and so thinking about buildings, thinking about data, thinking about corruption, and that actually, you know, in this time we're in now, when for a lot of us, not everyone, a lot of life is digitally mediated, and we're thinking about, you know, what are the things that bind us together.
Mm-hmm.
There's a new kind of work that needs to be done, and I guess I was wondering, like, what have you seen that has really impressed you in terms of people doing digital care or maintenance?
That happens on a lot of different fronts, because what constitutes the digital happens at multiple levels of a technological stack. I mean, for instance, if we look at the fact that so many basic services, healthcare, education have moved online, we've seen again this disparity of access. So we have lots of populations, I'm sure in the UK, just as much as there is the case in the US, but we have many disenfranchised populations, even within a supposedly advanced, technologically developed city like New York, where a large proportion of the population of our school-age children can't take advantage of online school because they don't have internet access at home, don't have a computer at home. So in some cases, those are two challenges right there. Having equitable access to the internet through kind of Wi-Fi, municipal Wi-Fi, broadband, community networks, etc. And when you have an entire infrastructure that's built on corporate service providers, equity, justice are not their top priorities. That's kind of, in many cases, inimical to shareholder value. So that's one case where we have some organizations, including a friend of mine, Greta Byram, who runs an organization called Community Tech New York, who has been working with some of these populations to build their own community networks when corporate service providers will not serve them. So that's one case of care. There's also libraries, schools, other nonprofit organizations renting laptops, Chromebooks, etc., to students who don't have access to them at home. So they're providing hardware. Libraries renting Wi-Fi hotspots. That's another type of, I guess you could say, care work of building in, mending infrastructures that are broken. There's also folks who build online digital communities, mutual aid networks, which rely very heavily on digital tools to knit people together, especially when gathering in physical space was still regarded, I mean, it is to some degree today, but there was a lot of panic around that in the early days of the pandemic. So these are just multiple levels, from basic infrastructure to hardware to software to the social networking that happens on digital tools, where we see a lot of really inspiring activity happening, different not-for-profit, even public agencies and self-organized advocacy groups working in these spaces.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, there's loads and loads of things I think that come out of that, but it brings me back really clearly to actually something we were talking about with the fellows, is that thinking about the experience that everyone has had in their own community. Some of the things that are beginning to happen are kind of communities are segmenting differently to how they used to. So, for instance, in the case of libraries, there are people who are desperate to get back into the physical space because the meaning of the building and the generosity of the building is so important. And there are people who are too nervous or not able to, who are happy to stay at home. And that actually, you know, one of the things that sort of becomes really interesting there is like the kind of hard segment there would normally be, are you digitally enabled or not, and therefore you're able to come into the library or not. But I think this is a different thing where actually you're thinking of the library library network, for instance, something that mitigates loneliness, that offers advice, that, you know, and that something that seems really interesting is that, well, interesting and hard and a real challenge is how to respond to that when you're suddenly delivering and doing things completely differently, you know.
So this is something that definitely I'm on the board of the Metropolitan New York Library Council here in New York, which serves all the 3 library systems, New York, Brooklyn, and Queens, and a lot of private libraries, archives, museum libraries, any type of library and any type of information organization can become a member of Metro. This is a conversation we've had in our last few board meetings, is how folks have found that the social infrastructural role of libraries has really been challenged, and they really have to re-envision what it will be in a potential post-COVID era. So there's a lot of librarians have acknowledged that some of the folks who have historically, even for decades, built their lives around the library as a vital hub, especially kind of senior populations, after school populations, might not come back. They might have found a stopgap or some other way, either for the library to serve them digitally or gone to another institution. So it's really making themselves welcoming again to those populations that they do want to come back, but also recognizing that maybe a lot of their services are now moving online for good, or adopting new social infrastructural services, maybe some of which could be as simple as extending beyond the walls of the building, doing partnerships with other organizations outside. So finding ways to use kind of the outdoor spaces of our cities is something that, it's not a novel solution again, but it's something that they're thinking a lot more about. YMCA is another organization that's doing a lot of this too. I go to the YMCA here pretty much every day. That has been closed for 6 months. That was a really vital social infrastructure, especially for senior groups who would meet, exercise in the morning, take a class, talk in the lounge, and then go to lunch together. So that was a really vital kind of service for them, social support network, and that's gone for a while. I wonder if the Y is reaching out to those folks. Schools as well, because schools don't just provide education. They are a really vital social infrastructural support system for especially disenfranchised populations. So those roles are being transformed as well. So yes, I mean, it goes way beyond, even if something is kind of its core services might be digital, its actual provision of resources goes way beyond the digital.
Yeah, and I think there's just, I don't know, I think as well, what I was kind of hearing in what you were saying is that even though all of those things are changing, sometimes constantly at the moment, those institutions are nothing really without the people who work in them, who come to them, and the understanding and the dynamic that they have. The idea that you're having to remotely recalibrate that must sometimes be quite scary. I think, and quite challenging.
Absolutely.
And so one of the other things, just to go on a completely different tack, that I really, really loved in your article was the piece about in the rental house, the lifting desk house, and the annoyance that the cleaner was cleaning it the old way, and the idea that this new structure was there, this new way of doing things was there, and she was hoovering a spiral staircase. And I guess I just love to hear you talk about that just a little bit more, because there's something, it feels like there's something really rich in, I don't know, wisdom, knowledge, experience, all kinds of things that comes out in that example.
Sure. So I think there are a lot of lessons to take away from that. One is that sometimes putting someone with kind of embodied knowledge, like a rich tradition of working in a certain field, into a new space can prove frustrating, but it can also kind of elicit new really productive adaptations. My first book I wrote about 20 years ago now was about library design. I went around to 15 cities around the country and looked at how they designed new public libraries. And in many cases, the administration, upper level administration, wanted to use that as almost like a social engineering experiment. So they had staff members who were doing things a certain way with a lot of institutional and personal knowledge, of developed a great deal of expertise and in caring for their populations. But it wasn't terribly efficient in many cases, or it didn't really adapt well to from a print culture to a digital culture, or to a changing demographic in the neighborhoods or the populations they were serving. So there was some hope that by putting them in a new physical space, it would in a way either force them to adapt or open up more generously, open up new opportunities. So that's one maybe lesson to take away from more of an administrative kind of position, the potential fruitfulness or generativity of taking experiential knowledge and seeing how it works and how it maybe has to adapt or expand in a new space. But there's also, particularly with the rise of kind of smart buildings and intelligent architectures, et cetera, an assumption that these embodied forms of knowledge, like the cleaner in the cool house who's stuck using her Hoover and her mop and bucket, that is not, because it's not an efficient or datified practice, that it is inherently worse than anything that could be informed by data or technologized in some way, which is not the case at all. In many cases, the manual, old school way of doing anything could actually be more, maybe not efficient, maybe more effective. In one case, it provides jobs that a computerized system doesn't. It provides kind of a social connection between a human cleaner and the family she's serving that you wouldn't get if you had a completely technologized system. So there are lots of things that are lost when we presume that the datified, technologized kind of mode of operating is inherently better because it is more efficient. And I think efficiency tends to be the primary value here in many cases, but there are lots of other values that you compromise on when you prioritize efficiency over all else.
I mean, I think one of the other things it made me think of was he didn't say, as far as I'm aware, how he thought the stairs ought to be cleaned, and he didn't design in a way of cleaning them. You know, the cleaning and the looking after them was left to another unspecified individual who was then doing it wrong, which feels to me like kind of just a really great matter for what happens a lot of the time when, I don't know, new technologies hit communities.
Right, and we see this in all levels of design. I mean, this is something that several design studios over the past few years, with this rise of academic interest in maintenance, have taken on maintenance as a studio topic. So they have incorporated a thinking about the afterlife of the building, longevity, the maintenance of the building into the design process itself. Whereas historically, that has been an afterthought. That is somebody else's responsibility. It's focusing on the novel new construction, whether it's designing an urban plan or a building or a technology. But hopefully, and I have seen some promising developments, there is a recognition that this should be a value that's built into the kind of even in fundamental stages of designing or conceiving of a project, is who will be responsible for maintaining it, and how, and what is its afterlife as well.
And I suppose related to that, just to go back to what you were saying about dependence on corporate technology, you know, I think particularly if you're using a cloud service, it could totally change overnight, you know, and so your agency as an individual or an organization is reduced enormously there. And I think, you know, I was literally just on a call with a group of people who had an incredibly important exam that was meant to happen today that couldn't happen because of technical issues at the last moment, and a group of people who'd been training for years have to do that exam another day, you know, and I think we're probably, I can imagine we're going to have to find new ways of coping with that kind of precariousness.
Yeah, I mean, even just today, there was some type of a severing of an internet cable, a basic kind of in Virginia, which essentially shut down its entire voting system. So a whole state's,
Oh
I mean,
my
you know, our elections are really fraught. So
God.
I don't know the details. I'm probably not. I might want to double check me, fact check me here, but I know there was an issue of like a single cable, which essentially shuts down a state's voting
Oh
apparatus.
my goodness.
We see cases as well of, again, going back to libraries, with more, not only libraries but our independent kind of collections of media that we have access to, whether it's popular media, movies, academic research, kind of news, popular news, because so little of that is actually owned anymore. They're not discrete units that we purchase or lend. They are run by, again, large kind of aggregate content managers, large corporations like Elsevier or Hulu. The fact, so they can make decisions based on what the longevity of preservation of particular content. So there's very little control we have over what specific content we have access to when it's bent on a rentership model and not an ownership model anymore. And that, and we see that again in kind of this number of smart appliances and gadgets that come into our homes as well. The disenfranchisement of people not able to fix their own stuff anymore because it's connected to a cloud or because it has some kind of black box mode of operation that we, everyday people, lay people, are not capable of comprehending and fixing. It's interesting that farmers are among the most vocal and active populations in the whole right to repair movement, because they have historically fixed their own tractors. And now that so many tractors are hooked up to the cloud and GPS and are run on kind of automated systems, that takes that agency away from them. So farmers are among, again, the most active advocates for the right to repair.
That makes me think of an event that I helped to run a couple of years ago, and one of the speakers at the event was a farmer, and he was maybe the fourth generation of his family, and he was in his 20s, and he came in and he was like, we're going to have smart everything, we're going to have a data-fied farm. And he told this story about how he was in the field with his uncle, and his uncle said to him, it's going to rain in half an hour. And this guy looked at his phone and he said, no, it's not. And his uncle said, when the cloud covers up the fourth telegraph pole, the rain is half an hour away.
Wow.
And he had this extraordinary moment, like as a farmer, you have like 40 harvests in your whole life. There's a limited number of opportunities to learn these things, and he was like, I've wasted 5 of mine because I've been looking at gadgets and actually I haven't been understanding.
This isn't to say that like digital technologies can't provide useful services. They can provide a very helpful supplement, but I think it's also recognizing that they are no better. They should not be supplanting this type of local, embodied, indigenous knowledge. This is another case, especially with like climate predictions. Climate scientists realizing that indigenous populations who have lived on the front line of climate change on coasts and kind of border zones have developed embodied ways of prediction that are maybe not more accurate, but provide different sensibilities, different forms of knowledge than what a purely data-driven system could offer. So just acknowledging the value of multiple epistemologies and methodologies.
Right. And I suppose just to go back kind of very slightly to where we started, actually, you know, in times when everything is changing and breaking down, it can feel like the experience you have or the knowledge that you have is not relevant, because every day is different. And I guess there's something about actually, I don't know, something about calling on that mix of things and having maybe like how do you have confidence in a time of breakdown and continual change? You know, it seems, I don't know, quite overwhelming, I think.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's even too much to expect to have confidence in a moment like this. And this is where social support networks can be really helpful, kind of calibrating your experience, just sharing experiences, lack of confidence, feeling of loss, feeling of hopelessness, just sharing that with people. Again, whether it's in-person social infrastructures and networks or using digital tools to help people share those resources. Maybe just normalizing the feeling of incompetence and lostness is a good place to start, and then you can kind of build up new networks that can serve as a reparative function. But yeah, I have lacked a lot of confidence in my ability to know what to do in many situations this year.
And I think it's really interesting that certainly I've noticed the way I'm taking on information now. There are whole statistical concepts I'd never heard of a month ago that I now feel like I maybe slightly understand, and then I realize I don't at all. Like there's something like very, very strange about how quickly your knowledge base kind of glides around, and then you realize that you're dealing in things you don't really understand, which doesn't really help, and that actually I feel there's something in there about maybe the ephemeralness of some of our information and networks now, which maybe could be helped by being slightly more anchored.
What do you mean by anchored?
Like, for instance, the concept of the graph that pops up on Twitter, or the chart that is badly labeled and nobody quite understands what the X and the Y are, but the graph is definitely moving up or down or something, and then everyone has feelings about it, and then a person who understands it goes, oh no, it means this. There's this whole sort of game of feelings because you're grasping for things, which is maybe slightly off topic, but I feel like I've been thinking a lot about what would it have been like to be in I suppose like in the 40s and World War II, when equally extraordinary things were happening every day, and you would hear about it the morning after at the earliest. It could be days and days and days. And I feel like there's something about just the slipperiness of everything at the moment that maybe I'd just like to know what's happening once a week.
I feel that too. I mean, there came a point where I stopped looking at the news during the day because it became just compulsive for me, especially during the Black Lives Matter uprisings in New York over the summer. I was just on Twitter, which was my Citizen app, all the time, every day. And I realized that I was just tense all the time. I wasn't feeling well because it was just constant anxiety, and ultimately realized that I can still be engaged and contribute to these movements, but I don't have to be plugged in around the clock. So for my own sanity and physical well-being, I had to kind of limit myself to just reading reading a print paper when it came out every morning. I grew up in central Pennsylvania surrounded by Amish families. And it was just really struck me. I don't know that I had the words to articulate it when I was younger, but just realizing we would go to dinner at some of their houses, they would talk about the news in their community. And the news was what comes out in the paper that's produced every 2 weeks.
Right.
For them, that's novel information. So just recognizing what is our real need for the update? How can we have a sustainable society? What is the granularity of temporal updating that we need to have a sustainable society? Do we really need kind of continual real-time flows? Or is that actually kind of deleterious in some cases? So this is just an issue that, is part of my childhood that has been in the back of my head ever since then.
And I think how that kind of wraps back to the theme is even just talking about how we care for ourselves in these times, very, very complicated. And I guess lastly, I just wanted to ask you, so just if you imagined momentarily that you were now a community leader in Manchester, say, all the way over in England, it's kind of when you're on the ground thinking about building communities and nurturing systems that might be breaking and changing and broken, I'm just wondering, is there any advice you might offer to our fellows as a kind of parting gift, I guess?
Well, I would say, and I imagine your fellows already know this. I think this is more a lesson that sometimes kind of well-meaning city agencies or design firms have to consider, is that rather than building a new system, recognizing partnering with existing organizations that are already doing the work, because it's often kind of grassroots organizations who already recognize what the challenges are and are trying with limited means to address them, often very successfully and ingeniously. But if they had the support of your design skills or your technical skills or your government money or your funding, whatever the case may be, they could do that work a lot better. So it's just really thinking about what it means to partner with existing organizations, doing that respectfully, being deferential to the knowledge that those folks already have, even if it is a different kind of disciplinary orientation than what you're bringing to them. So just really think about how to respectfully do and sensitively do partnerships, and acknowledging again those multiple intelligences, and acknowledging the value of what's already happening in an amateur way on the ground.
I really love that. That's, and it seems like actually that might even be a thing that we could really take forward across the rest of the program. And so thank you. That was
sure, pleasure.
And I know I probably took you on a slightly wandering path. But I suppose these are complicated times, and I don't know basically is what I would say. Right.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a